Now that might sound a bit harsh, doesn't it? Force yourself. Nobody likes to be forced. But here's the secret. The kind of force I'm talking about isn't external. It's not someone standing over you with a whip. No, this force comes from within. It's the discipline to do what needs to be done, even when you don't feel like it. Especially when you don't feel like it. Let me ask you something. How many of you have set a goal in January only to abandon it by February? Don't be shy. I've done it myself. We all have. And why does this happen? Because we haven't developed the ability to force ourselves past that initial burst of enthusiasm into the valley of difficulty and up the mountain of achievement on the other side. You see, motivation is what gets you started, but habit is what keeps you going. And habits don't form without that initial period of forcing yourself to act against your own resistance. That's just the way we're wired. The human brain loves comfort. It loves the known. It loves the safe. And that's a problem when your goals require you to venture into the uncomfortable, the unknown, the risky. Now, I'm not suggesting that achieving your goals should be a miserable experience. Not at all. What I am suggesting is that there will be moments, many moments, when you'll need to override your natural inclination to retreat to comfort. And in those moments, your ability to force yourself forward is what will determine your destiny. Let me tell you about a young man years ago. He had dreams, big dreams. He wanted to start his own business. But every time he faced a setback, and in business, setbacks are as certain as the sunrise, he would retreat. He'd go back to what was comfortable. He'd procrastinate on the hard calls. He'd avoid the difficult conversations. He'd put off the challenging work. One day I sat down with him and I said, here's what's happening. You're letting your feelings dictate your actions. Successful people let their goals dictate their actions, and they manage their feelings along the way. That was the turning point for him. He realized that he had been waiting to feel ready, to feel confident, to feel certain. But those feelings often come after the action, not before. They're the result of doing the difficult thing, not the prerequisite for it. Now, let me share with you some principles about learning to force yourself to achieve any goal. These aren't complex, but they are profound. And if you apply them, I promise you your life will change. First, you must define your goal with crystal clarity. Vague goals produce vague results. If you say, I want to be successful, well, what does that mean? Successful at what? By when? How will you measure it? Be specific. Instead of saying, I want to be financially secure, say, I want to have $50,000 in my savings account by December 31st of next year. Now that's specific. That's measurable. That's time-bound. That's a goal you can work toward with clarity. And let me tell you why this matters for forcing yourself. When your goal is clear, your reasons for forcing yourself become clear. When the alarm goes off at 5 a.m. and you're tempted to hit snooze, a vague goal won't get you out of bed. But a specific goal with a clear deadline and clear consequences for not achieving it will give you the leverage you need to force yourself up and at AM. Second principle, you must link massive pain to not achieving your goal and massive pleasure to achieving it. This is the fundamental driving force of human behavior. We move away from pain and toward pleasure. That's just how we're wired. So ask yourself, what will it cost me if I don't achieve this goal? What will I miss out on? Who will I disappoint, including myself, really feel that pain? Make it vivid in your mind. And then ask, what will I gain when I achieve this goal? How will I feel? What will it mean for my life, my family, my future? Make that pleasure vivid as well. And here's the key, you've got to bring these consequences into the present moment. When you're faced with a difficult action and you're tempted to procrastinate, you need to immediately connect avoiding that action with pain and taking that action with pleasure. That's how you force yourself to do what needs to be done. I remember talking to a gentleman who had struggled with his weight for decades. He'd try a diet, lose a few pounds, then gain it all back, plus more. The cycle repeated over and over. But then something changed. His doctor told him, if you don't make a change, you won't see your grandchildren grow up. Suddenly, the pain of not changing became immediate and intense. And the pleasure of being there for his grandchildren became his driving force. He lost 70 pounds and has kept it off for years. Why? Because he linked massive pain to not changing and massive pleasure to changing. Third principle, break your goal down into small, manageable actions. You've heard the question, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. The same is true for any goal. Break it down into bite-sized pieces. This is crucial for forcing yourself, because forcing yourself to take one small action is much easier than forcing yourself to tackle an entire goal at once. If your goal is to write a book, forcing yourself to write one page today is doable. Forcing yourself to write the entire book today is not. I spoke with a woman once who had a dream of earning her college degree, but she had a full-time job, 3 kids, and a husband who worked nights. When she looked at the entirety of what earning that degree would require, it seemed impossible. But when she broke it down to I just need to complete 1 assignment today, it became manageable. 4 years later, she walked across that stage and received her diploma, 1 assignment at a time. 4th principle, create accountability. Very few people can force themselves consistently without external accountability. We're social creatures. We care what others think. We don't want to let people down. Use this to your advantage. Tell people about your goal. Join a group of like-minded individuals. Hire a coach. Find an accountability partner. When you know someone is expecting you to take action, you're much more likely to force yourself to do it, even when you don't feel like it. I remember working with a group of entrepreneurs. We set up a simple accountability system. Each person would declare what they were going to accomplish by the next meeting. At the start of each meeting, they had to report their results. No one wanted to be the person who didn't follow through. That social pressure was often the difference between action and inaction. 5th principle, track your progress. What gets measured gets improved. When you can see your progress, it becomes a source of motivation. And when you can see your lack of progress, it becomes a kick in the pants. Either way, tracking keeps you honest and helps you force yourself to stay on track. I had a client once who wanted to increase his sales calls. He resisted making those calls because, like most people, he didn't enjoy rejection. So I told him, don't focus on the results of the calls. Just focus on making them. Put a chart on your wall. Every time you make a call, mark it down. Try to beat your number from the previous day. Within a month, his call reluctance was gone. Why? Because he shifted his focus from the outcome, which he couldn't entirely control, to the action, which he could. 6th principle, develop the skill of managing your emotional state. This is perhaps the most important skill for forcing yourself to achieve any goal. Your emotions will fluctuate, that's normal. But your actions don't have to fluctuate with them. Learn to recognize when negative emotions are influencing your behavior. Then develop strategies to change those emotions or act despite them. This might involve changing your physiology, standing up straight, breathing deeply, moving your body. It might involve changing your focus, concentrating on what you're grateful for instead of what you're worried about. It might involve changing your language, what you say to yourself and how you say it. I worked with an Olympic athlete once who had a ritual before every competition. She would stand tall, breathe deeply, and say to herself, I am ready. I am strong. I can do this. She wasn't always confident. She wasn't always ready, but this ritual helped her manage her emotional state so she could perform at her best regardless of how she felt. 7th principle, build your discipline muscle through small wins. Discipline, like a muscle, grows stronger with use. Start with small acts of self-discipline. Make your bed every morning. Floss your teeth every night. Read for 10 minutes daily. As you succeed with these small disciplines, your capacity for tackling bigger challenges will grow. I knew a man who had never been able to stick to an exercise routine. Instead of setting a goal to work out an hour a day, he started with just 5 minutes. 5 minutes of push-ups every day, no matter what. Some days he did more, but he never did less. After 6 months of this tiny discipline, he had built the capacity to tackle much more demanding workouts. His discipline muscle had grown. 8th principle, accept that discomfort is part of the process. We live in a society that worships comfort. We want everything to be easy, convenient, painless. But achieving significant goals is rarely easy, convenient, or painless. There will be discomfort. Accept it. Embrace it. Even welcome it, because discomfort is often a sign that you're growing, that you're pushing your boundaries, that you're on the path to achievement. I remember talking to a marathon runner about how she pushed through the wall, that point in a race where your body is screaming at you to stop. She said, I don't try to make the pain go away. I acknowledge it. I say to myself, yes, this hurts. And I can handle it. That acceptance actually makes the pain easier to bear. 9th principle, use the power of habits. Forcing yourself is hard, really hard. But if you force yourself consistently for long enough, the action becomes a habit. And habits don't require force. They happen automatically. So focus on forcing yourself long enough for the action to become habitual. It might take 30 days. It might take 60. It might take 90. But once it's a habit, you've created a lifetime asset. I worked with a writer who struggled to find time to write. Every day was a battle to force himself to sit down at the keyboard. But he committed to writing for just 30 minutes every morning, first thing before checking email or news or social media. After about 45 days, something shifted. He no longer had to force himself. In fact, if he didn't write, he felt off like something was missing from his day. The habit had formed. 10th principle, surround yourself with the right influences. Jim Rohn, that's me, famously said, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. This applies to forcing yourself as well. If you're surrounded by disciplined, goal-oriented people, it's easier to force yourself to take action. If you're surrounded by lazy, undisciplined people, it's much harder. So be intentional about your environment. Choose your influences wisely. Read books that strengthen your resolve. Listen to podcasts that reinforce your commitment. Associate with people who pull you up rather than drag you down. I remember a young man who was trying to build a business while his roommates were partying every night. It was an impossible situation. The constant temptation and the subtle peer pressure made it nearly impossible for him to force himself to do the work needed. Once he changed his environment, his results changed dramatically. Now, let me tell you something important. These principles aren't just theories. They're not just nice ideas. They're battle-tested strategies that have worked for thousands of successful people. But knowing them isn't enough. You have to apply them. And applying them isn't a one-time event. It's a daily practice. Let me tell you about discipline. Discipline is the bridge between goals and accomplishment. And that bridge is built one plank at a time, one day at a time. Some days you'll be excited to build. Some days you'll have to force yourself, but every day that you do, that bridge gets stronger. And here's the beautiful thing about forcing yourself. It gets easier with practice. The first time you force yourself to wake up at 5 a.m. to work on your goal, it's agonizing. The second time is still hard, but a little less so. By the 30th time, it's just what you do. It's who you are. Let me share something personal with you. When I first started in personal development, I was terrified of public speaking. The thought of standing in front of a room full of people made my heart race and my palms sweat. But I knew that to make the impact I wanted to make, I had to master this skill. So I forced myself. I joined Toastmasters. I accepted every speaking opportunity, no matter how small. I practiced in front of mirrors, in front of friends, in front of anyone who would listen. And yes, there were disasters. There were times I forgot what I was saying, times my voice cracked, times I could see the audience checking their watches. But I kept forcing myself to step up to that podium, and eventually something magical happened. Speaking became not just bearable, but enjoyable. I discovered that I had a gift for connecting with audiences, for making complex ideas simple, for inspiring people to take action. If I hadn't forced myself through that initial period of discomfort, I would never have discovered that gift. I would never be standing here today sharing these ideas with you. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Jim, this all sounds great, but I've tried to force myself before, and I always end up giving up. What's the secret to making it stick this time? Great question. And the answer lies in understanding the difference between motivation and commitment. Motivation is a feeling. Commitment is a decision. Feelings come and go, but decisions can last a lifetime if you honor them. When you're motivated, forcing yourself is easy, but motivation is like a hot bath. It gets cold quickly. That's when commitment takes over. That's when you say, I don't care how I feel. I made a decision and I'm sticking to it. And here's the key to commitment. It's not about being perfect. It's about being persistent. It's about getting back on track quickly when you fall off, and you will fall off. We all do. The difference is committed people don't let a slip become a slide. They force themselves back into action quickly. I remember working with a woman who was building her own consulting practice. She had a rule, make 5 prospecting calls every day. One day she got busy with client work and forgot to make her calls. By the time she remembered, it was 11 p.m. Most people would have said, well, I'll just make 10 calls tomorrow, but not her. She got on the phone at 11 p.m. and made her 5 calls. Why? Because she understood that it wasn't about the 5 calls. It was about honoring her commitment to herself. It was about being the kind of person who does what they say they'll do, even when no one is watching. That's the essence of forcing yourself. It's about becoming a person of integrity, whole and complete, with your actions aligned with your words. Your words aligned with your goals, and your goals aligned with your values. Now, let's talk about resistance. Whenever you set a significant goal, you will face resistance. It's as predictable as gravity. And understanding this resistance is crucial to overcoming it. Resistance takes many forms. Sometimes it's fear, fear of failure, fear of success, fear of the unknown. Sometimes it's doubt, doubt in your abilities, doubt in your plan, doubt in whether the goal is even worth pursuing. Sometimes it's simple laziness, the desire to stay comfortable rather than push your boundaries. Whatever form it takes, know this: resistance is normal, expected, even useful, because it shows you're pushing beyond your current limits. The problem isn't experiencing resistance. The problem is letting resistance win. So how do you overcome resistance? By recognizing it for what it is, a natural response to growth, not a sign that you should give up, and then forcing yourself to take action anyway. I remember a businessman who wanted to expand his company internationally. Every time he took steps toward this goal, he felt overwhelming anxiety. He'd stay awake at night worried about all the things that could go wrong. This anxiety became his excuse for inaction. When we worked together, I helped him see that his anxiety wasn't a red flag saying stop. It was a green flag saying growth ahead. Once he reframed his anxiety as excitement, which physiologically feels very similar, he was going to force himself through it rather than being stopped by it. And that's an important point. Often, what stops us isn't our actual circumstances, but our interpretation of those circumstances. Change the interpretation and you change your ability to force yourself into action. Let's talk about willpower. Many people think forcing yourself is purely a function of willpower. And willpower is important, but willpower is also a limited resource. It gets depleted with use. That's why trying to force yourself through sheer willpower often leads to failure in the long run. Instead, you need to create systems that reduce the need for willpower, habits that make the right actions automatic, environments that make the right actions easier, strategies that make the right actions more appealing. For instance, if you're trying to force yourself to exercise in the morning, don't rely on willpower alone. Put your workout clothes next to your bed the night before. Set multiple alarms. Arrange to meet a friend at the gym. Make a rule that you can't have coffee until after your workout. By creating these systems, you reduce the amount of willpower required to take action. I worked with a salesman once who struggled to make his cold calls. Every day was an internal battle. So we created a system. First thing in the morning, before checking email or voicemail, he would make his calls. He put his call list on top of his keyboard so he couldn't work on anything else without moving it. He hung a sign on his computer that said no email until calls are done. He told his assistant not to bring him coffee until he'd made at least 5 calls. With these systems in place, forcing himself became much easier. Now, let's delve into the role of your identity in forcing yourself to achieve goals. This is profound, so listen carefully. The most powerful force in the human personality is the need to remain consistent with how we define ourselves. If you see yourself as a disciplined person, you'll act in disciplined ways. If you see yourself as a procrastinator, you'll procrastinate. So one of the most effective ways to force yourself to take action is to change how you define yourself. Instead of saying, I'm trying to exercise more, say, I am an athlete in training. Instead of saying, I'm trying to write a book, say, I am an author. Then ask yourself, what would an athlete do in this situation? What would an author do? When your actions stem from your identity, forcing yourself becomes less necessary because you're not acting against your nature, you're acting in alignment with it. I remember a businessman who was notoriously disorganized. His desk was a mess, his calendar was a disaster, and he was constantly missing deadlines. When I asked him how he saw himself, he laughed and said, I'm just not a details person. That's not me. As long as that was his identity, his behavior wasn't going to change. So we worked on shifting his identity. He started telling himself, I'm becoming more organized every day. Organization is now a priority for me. It felt fake at first, but as he forced himself to take organized actions, cleaning his desk at the end of each day, using a digital calendar, setting reminders, his identity began to shift. And as his identity shifted, the actions that once required so much force became more natural. Let's talk about another powerful concept, the compound effect. Small, consistent actions repeated over time yield massive results. This is true in finance, in fitness and learning, in relationships, in every area of life. Understanding the compound effect helps you force yourself because it connects today's small action to tomorrow's big result. It helps you see that the momentary discomfort of forcing yourself now is worth the long-term benefit later. I worked with a real estate investor who was struggling to build his portfolio. He wanted to own 50 properties but found it hard to force himself to look for deals, make offers, and follow through. So I had him do a simple exercise. We calculated how much passive income each property would generate. Then we calculated how much monthly income 50 properties would produce. Then we divided that monthly figure by 30 to get a daily figure. Suddenly he could see that each day he procrastinated, he was losing that amount of potential income. Each day he forced himself to take action, he was earning it. This perspective transformed his ability to force himself. He stopped seeing the work as a burden and started seeing it as an investment with a specific calculable return. Now, let me address something important. Some of you might be thinking, Jim, all this talk about forcing yourself sounds exhausting. Is this really how I have to live my life, constantly pushing myself, never relaxing, never enjoying the moment? Not at all. The goal is not to live in a constant state of force. The goal is to use force strategically to build habits and systems that eventually make force less necessary. It's like pushing a car. It takes a lot of force to get it moving from a standstill. But once it's moving, maintaining that movement takes much less effort. I remember a conversation with a successful CEO. Early in his career, he had to force himself to network, to introduce himself to strangers, to speak up in meetings. It was uncomfortable, even painful. But over time, these behaviors became second nature. Now, he doesn't have to force himself at all. In fact, he enjoys the very activities that once required so much effort. That's the beautiful paradox of forcing yourself. The more you do it, the less you need to do it. The actions that once required tremendous force eventually require little to none. They become part of who you are. But there's a catch. To reach that point, you have to push through the initial resistance. You have to force yourself consistently enough and long enough for the new behavior to become automatic. There's no shortcut. There's no easy way around this. It's part of the process of growth and transformation. Let me tell you about the concept of activation energy from chemistry. In a chemical reaction, activation energy is the initial energy required to start the reaction. Once the reaction is underway, it often becomes self-sustaining. The same principle applies to human behavior. The hardest part is usually starting. That first push, getting out of bed, sitting down to write, picking up the phone to make that call, requires the most force. But once you're in motion, continuing is much easier. This is why the just 5 minutes rule is so effective. Tell yourself you'll just exercise for 5 minutes or write for 5 minutes or work on your business plan for 5 minutes. That lowers the activation energy required. And once you've started, you'll often find that you continue beyond those 5 minutes because continuing requires less force than starting. I coached an aspiring author once who had been talking about writing a book for years but never seemed to make progress. His problem wasn't a lack of ideas or talent. It was simply getting started each day. So we created a rule, right, for just 10 minutes every morning, first thing. That's it. Just 10 minutes. This tiny commitment lowered the activation energy enough that he could force himself to begin. And once he began, he often wrote for an hour or more. 3 years later, he's published 3 successful books. All because he learned how to force himself past that initial resistance. Let's talk about another crucial aspect of forcing yourself, the role of purpose. When your goal is connected to a deeper purpose, something beyond just making money or looking good or proving yourself, forcing yourself becomes much easier. Purpose provides the emotional fuel that powers your ability to force yourself through difficulty. When you know why you're doing something, when that why is meaningful and compelling, you tap into reserves of strength you didn't know you had. I once worked with a woman who wanted to start a non-profit organization. She had a clear vision of what this organization would do, but she was overwhelmed by the logistical challenges, the paperwork, the fundraising, the team building. Every day was a struggle to force herself to tackle these tasks. When I asked her why this organization was important to her, she shared a powerful personal story. The cause she was fighting for had deeply affected her family. This wasn't just a nice idea for her. It was a mission born from personal pain and the desire to prevent others from experiencing similar suffering. Once she reconnected with this purpose, once she put pictures of the people she wanted to help on her desk, once she started each day by reminding herself why this work mattered, forcing herself became much easier. The paperwork was still tedious. The fundraising was still challenging. But these difficulties paled in comparison to the importance of her mission. Let me tell you something important. Discipline without direction is drudgery. If you're forcing yourself just for the sake of being disciplined, you'll burn out. But when your discipline is directed toward a purpose that matters deeply to you, it becomes meaningful, even energizing. So ask yourself, what's the deeper purpose behind your goal? How does it connect to your values, your passions, your desire to contribute? The clearer and more compelling your answers to these questions, the easier it will be to force yourself to do what needs to be done. Now, let's address another critical factor in forcing yourself, your environment. Your physical and social environment can either support your efforts or sabotage them. And most people dramatically underestimate the influence of environment on behavior. If you want to force yourself to eat healthier, keeping junk food in your house makes that task much harder. If you want to force yourself to save money, spending time with friends who pressure you to go shopping makes that task much harder. If you want to force yourself to build a business, working in a chaotic, interruption-filled environment makes that task much harder. So instead of relying solely on willpower to force yourself, engineer your environment to make the right actions easier and the wrong actions harder. Clear the path to success and put obstacles in the path to failure. I knew a man who struggled with late night snacking. He would force himself to eat well all day, then sabotage his progress after dinner. His solution was simple but effective. He stopped buying snack foods. If he wanted a late night snack, he'd have to get dressed, get in his car, and drive to the store. That extra effort was usually enough to prevent the behavior. Another client of mine, a consultant, was constantly distracted by email and social media when he needed to focus on important projects. His solution was to use website blocking software during his most productive hours. By making distraction harder, he made focus easier. Your social environment is just as important as your physical environment. The people around you will either raise your standards or lower them. They'll either reinforce your commitment or undermine it. Choose wisely. I remember a young entrepreneur who joined a mastermind group of successful business owners. Suddenly, his standards for what constituted hard work completely changed. What he had thought was a full day's effort now looked like a half-hearted attempt compared to what his peers were doing. Without anyone directly telling him to work harder, he naturally forced himself to raise his game because his environment had changed his perception of what was possible and what was necessary. Let's talk about another powerful concept, the power of public commitment. When you declare your intentions publicly, you create social pressure to follow through. This pressure can help you force yourself when your internal motivation wanes. Now, there's a caveat here. Research shows that for some goals, public declaration can be counterproductive because it gives you a premature sense of accomplishment. But for goals that require consistent action over time, public commitment can be a powerful forcing function. I worked with a woman who wanted to run a marathon. She had started training several times in the past, but always gave up after a few weeks. This time she did something different. She announced her intention to all her friends and family. She created a blog to document her training. She raised money for charity based on her completion of the race. These public commitments created a level of accountability that helped her force herself to train even on days when she didn't feel like it. The thought of letting down her donors, of admitting failure on her blog, of facing friends who would ask about her training, these potential social consequences became powerful motivators. She completed that marathon, and when I asked her what made the difference this time, she said, "I didn't give myself an out. By telling everyone what I was doing, I backed myself into a corner. The only way I was through." Sometimes backing yourself into a corner is exactly what you need to force yourself to break through. Let me tell you about another strategy, the power of investing in your goal. When you put skin in the game, when you invest money, time, or reputation, you increase your commitment to follow through. I knew a man who wanted to learn Spanish. He had bought books, downloaded apps, even watched Spanish television. But he never stuck with it long enough to become fluent. Then he did something radical. He paid for a non-refundable trip to Spain and arranged to stay with a family that spoke no English. Suddenly, his motivation to learn Spanish took on a new urgency. He forced himself to study for hours each day because he had created real consequences for not following through. I've seen the same principle work in business. One client was hesitant to fully commit to a new market. He would dip his toe in, test the waters, but never dive in completely. I encouraged him to make a significant investment in that market, to rent office space, hire local staff, put his company's name on a building. Once he had made that investment, his commitment to making it work increased exponentially. He forced himself to overcome obstacles that previously would have caused him to retreat. Now, I want to address something important, the relationship between forcing yourself and enjoying the process. Some people think these are mutually exclusive, that if you have to force yourself to do something, you can't possibly enjoy it. But that's simply not true. Often, the initial act of forcing yourself is uncomfortable, but once you're engaged in the activity, you can find enjoyment, flow, even joy in the process. And over time, as you develop mastery, the activity that once required force becomes a source of fulfillment. I remember talking to a concert pianist about practice. He said, "There are days I have to force myself to sit at the piano. But once I'm there, once my fingers start moving across the keys, I find my rhythm. The force gets me to the piano. The music keeps me there." The same is true in any endeavor. The force gets you started, the engagement keeps you going. And if you stick with it long enough, what once required force often becomes a source of flow. But here's the key. Don't wait for enjoyment before taking action. Force yourself to take action and then find the enjoyment within the action. That's the path to mastery and fulfillment. Let me share something with you about success. Success is not a destination, it's a journey. It's a continuous process of setting goals, forcing yourself to take action, achieving those goals, and then setting new ones. The moment you stop setting goals, the moment you stop forcing yourself to grow, is the moment you begin to decline. I've met too many people who achieved a goal and then rested on their laurels, only to find that their skills atrophied, their momentum stalled, and their sense of purpose diminished. Don't let that happen to you. Use each achievement as a stepping stone to the next challenge. Keep forcing yourself to reach new heights. A successful businessman once told me, "The biggest danger in my life is not failure, it's success." When I fail, I'm motivated to work harder. When I succeed, I'm tempted to relax. He had developed a practice of setting his next goal before fully completing his current one, ensuring he maintained his momentum and his ability to force himself forward. Now, I want to address the role of recovery in forcing yourself. This might seem counterintuitive, but proper recovery is essential for sustained discipline. If you force yourself continuously without adequate rest, you'll burn out. And burnout is the enemy of long-term achievement. Think of discipline like a muscle. When you work a muscle, you create microscopic tears in the tissue. It's during recovery that the muscle repairs itself and grows stronger. The same principle applies to willpower and discipline. Periods of intense focus should be followed by periods of genuine recovery. I worked with an executive who prided himself on his workaholism. He would regularly work 80-hour weeks, force himself to keep going on minimal sleep, and wear his exhaustion as a badge of honor. But his productivity was actually declining, his decision-making was suffering, and his health was deteriorating. We implemented a recovery strategy, regular breaks throughout the day, a hard stop to work at a reasonable hour, true weekends off, and proper vacations. To his surprise, his ability to force himself to focus during work hours actually increased. His productivity improved. His creativity soared. By working with his biology rather than against it, he achieved more by doing less. So remember, strategic recovery isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's what enables you to sustain the force required for long-term achievement. Now, let me tell you about a concept that's transformed many lives, the idea of pre-deciding. Pre-deciding means making decisions in advance about how you'll handle specific situations, so when those situations arise, you don't have to rely on in the moment willpower to force yourself to do the right thing. For example, instead of deciding each morning whether you'll exercise, you pre-decide that Monday, Wednesday, and Friday are your exercise days, no matter what. Instead of deciding in the moment whether to have that extra drink, you pre-decide that 2 drinks is your limit at any social event. Instead of deciding when you're tired whether to keep working on your goal, you pre-decide that you'll put in at least 1 hour every day, regardless of how you feel. Pre-deciding removes the internal negotiation that drains your willpower and makes it harder to force yourself. When the decision is already made, all that's left is to follow through. I knew a woman who struggled with saying no to requests that distracted her from her priorities. Every time someone asked for her time, she'd feel obligated to say yes, then resent the commitment later. We created a pre-decision framework for her. Any request that didn't align with her top 3 priorities received an automatic no. It wasn't always easy to deliver that no, but having the pre-decision in place made it much easier to force herself to protect her time.